Hi and welcome. Sammy from Invictus Studio here, and today I will be showing you 10 tips to improve your sculpting workflow in 3DCoat. Tip number 1. Abuse primitives and curves. Primitives and curves are basically the shapes which you can add via booleans into any object in the scene. They make a fantastic base to start sculpting with. The best way to use curves, however, is by following the simple shape with a full organic sculpt. This will especially prove useful whenever doing stuff like animals or humans. You can start and apply a curve for a simple spine and head shape that runs across. Then you can use a new set of curves to make limbs, and after that you can use them for fingers. Such will be a nightmare without the curve tools. Also, make sure to save your curves so that you can maybe use them on later for other stuff. Tip number 2. Resample correctly. In 3DCoat you get a lot of options and alternative methods when you want to resample an object of choice, which is basically the equivalent of Blender's remesh modifier. 3DCoat's resample system produces triangles instead of clean quads. Remember that this is crucial information. This means that whenever you do a multi-res subdivision on it, you are more likely to see artifacts and an equal distribution of polygons. The best way to go about this is to first increase the poly count via resampling the object in voxel mode, and later on switch back with preferably the same poly count into surface mode, which is crucial for a couple of reasons. Mainly that whenever you switch to surface mode, the triangles get automatically redistributed in a very equal and optimized manner, even though the same triangles will later cause problems after subdivision. So avoid subdivision altogether unless you are using a quad-only mesh that was modeled by either hand or retopology. Tip number 3. Merge correctly. Many may not know this, but merging mindlessly can seriously harm the quality of your model if you are not careful with it. So there is a way to go about it, as there is 2 types of merging that you need to handle correctly. The first is voxel merging. To do this, you basically select all the objects you want to merge, with the last one being a voxel object. The only thing to keep in mind is that the resolution of the last object will be shared across all other objects, even if they were in surface mode. So they will be automatically converted into voxel mode as well, all with the same uniform world space based polygon density or voxel density. This is important to understand because if you, for an example, make an iguana lizard and you're merging one of those individual spines at the top of its back, which are probably in voxel mode with a relatively good poly count of, let's say, 1 million polygons, if you want to be insanely precise with just those details. What happens here is the moment you merge it, the rest of the body will get the same exact uniform world space density, and you will most likely end up with the object that has like 1 billion polygons or something, which is not good because at most you want to have like 50 million or 100 million depending on your rig. So never ever do a voxel mode merge unless you've thoroughly calculated the exchange and estimated the end result. For surface mode merging, it is just simply doing the same thing whilst having the last object selected being in surface mode. What happens here basically is that all the other objects, whether in surface mode already or not, will be converted into new surface mode objects, which will be part of this new merge object. And basically by default, it will apply some sort of boolean which will remove all intersections between the surfaces and give you a nice edge. However, if you just don't want the edge, you can just uncheck it. There's also 3 other really good reasons for unchecking the boolean box on merging in surface mode. The first reason is that this type of operation of merging can be very demanding on your computer and can genuinely just lead to operation failure if you've got too many polygons to work with. The second reason is that this object can make it easier to freeze formerly separate parts via topological masking with brushes. And the third reason is that, well, you get more control in case you do want to merge the surfaces. And one good example is, for an example, when you're doing a dragon wing, and simply you want the wing to keep its own density and the dragon to have its own density as well. You don't want to merge with voxel mode because that will create problems, since the wing has much more surface area, yet you don't want the same level of detail on it. So once you merge without booleans, you won't risk a crash, and you can weld both meshes manually via the tube brush. And after you do apply this tube between the wing and the dragon, you can use the reconstruction brush to fix the mesh and make it cleaner. This is very, very useful for optimization. Tip number 4, progressive polygon increase. Adding too little polygons when sculpting leads to lack of definition. Meanwhile, adding too much will lead to difficulty controlling the general shape. That can eliminate this problem, which everyone should follow for both optimized poly count and an easy sculpting process. Stage 1 should be blocking out the shapes in voxel mode and getting the primary forms, preferably stay at 100k for a usual simple sculpt, and up to 1 million if it's a large body. You can do this via steps. Step 1 could be using only like 60,000 triangles when making each clump of clay, and maybe making it 300,000 when adding some muscle definition, and maybe even 1 million once you start adding stuff like skin folds or such details, which are still relatively large. Stage 2 is resampling to a higher number of polygons. I usually resample to between 35 and 60 million polygons depending on what I want to make. Here you can absolutely abuse all the VDMs you have been making to detail your model to crazy levels. Stage 3 is about subdividing areas that need more detail with the subdivision brush. I usually do this on areas of an animal that can have close-up shots, like the eyes, the head, the fingers, or the feet. This allows you to allocate polygons based on priority. Tip number 5. Be careful with freezing or hiding in voxel mode. In 3DCoat, the freeze tool is your best friend at some times and your worst enemy when you let your guard down. Simply put, if you are using the freeze tool in surface mode, you have nothing to worry about. But voxel mode users need to remember one thing: there exists no real freezing in voxel mode, simply because the moment you choose either that thing or any other tool set which is exclusive to the surface mode, you will temporarily be switched to surface mode even if it doesn't say that. The moment you click on any clay or voxel tool, all the masking will disappear. Moreover, whenever in voxel mode, undoing with Ctrl Z has a high chance of unfreezing random chunks of the frozen mesh, which will force you to press Ctrl D to deselect and start all over again. Tip number 6. Use the correct UDIM settings for exporting. This tip is essential for those who want to keep the UV tiling the same way it usually stays in Blender to make it easier to import the textures manually with Node Wrangler. This starts right before confirming the export from the retopology room to the paint room. What you want to do is uncheck import tiles as UV sets, and also uncheck treat materials as separate textures. This will result in all tiles being in the same UV set and material. This lessens the confusion when exporting to certain programs. Tip number 7. Setting up the correct curvature map settings. 3DCoat has multiple light baking tools for stuff like ambient occlusion, curvature map, and other stuff. The focus here is the curvature map baker. What you want to do is simply go to Edit, then Preferences, Tools, and then uncheck Use RGB Curvature. The reason is that this curvature mapping tool focuses on big curvatures instead of small ones, and is meant for hard surface things perhaps. It also has a lot of information because of the fact that it uses color instead of black and white, which is perhaps the case in other programs you might be familiar with, like Substance Painter. However, this RGB curvature is also bad for organic high detail shapes because it does not focus on small details and has little customizability. So when you uncheck the RGB curvature baking, you will instead use the legacy curvature baking tool, which bakes another type of map called the cavity map basically, which, like the name suggests, focuses instead on cavities and smaller details, which are very useful for texturing characters and stuff with features like skin or those reptilian scales, which have those tiny crown sections between each individual scale, which you might want to color black or something to give it more realism. Another good thing about the Legacy Baker is that it lets you just remove all the huge details altogether and just focus on the small ones. Tip number 8. Avoid baking artifacts into normals. In 3DCoat, the normal map baking tool is very limited because you simply cannot import a custom cage mesh for scanning the normal map from the high poly reference. This becomes annoying and destructive around high poly spikes where the low poly can easily just deviate away from baking once inflated. Fix this by creating just one extra support loop right around the tip of any such object, as well as an extra loop for safety measure. This makes baking much cleaner and safer. Tip number 9. Avoid click dragging on some occasions. The famous click and drag VDM brush is a universal tool for sculpting. However, in 3DCoat, if the area you want to hit with the texture is way too big, it can crash your program just by dragging the VDM over it and the area being too big. Consider instead just using the standard dotted stroke so that you can have a much lower possibility of crashing 3DCoat when using it. You can also play around in the brush settings to rotate the brush properly and maybe even add some jitter before striking. This is something that only applies in extreme cases though. The only thing you will need to look out for when just using the normal click and drag brush is just checking the remove stretching option on the top left of your screen to get sharper details in surface mode. Tip number 10. Disable autosave if you don't need it. Simple yet important. Make sure to disable autosave if you already know when to save your file after gaining progress, because each save will lag your program at a certain interval, which can annoy you if it comes unexpectedly. It can also drain your computer space very fast. Thanks for watching. If this tutorial has helped you, then maybe consider leaving a like and subscribing if you wish to. If you guys want us to cover other things, then please tell us. It would be appreciated. All suggestions and feedback is appreciated, so feel free to comment.